This week, we speak with Guy Podjarny from Snyk. In the news segment, Exchange doesn't change keys. Let's Encrypt throws some certs for a loop. Microsoft reveals safe deployment wizardry, microservices go under the microscope, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Nearly every business today relies on mobile applications, yet the vast majority do not adequately secure them. Once downloaded, mobile apps escape your control outside the secure network perimeter, thus making them easy targets for hackers. Enter GuardSquare. From the makers of ProGuard, GuardSquare integrates transparently and seamlessly into the development process, adding multiple layers of protection to Android and iOS applications, and effectively hardening apps against both on-device and off-device attacks. Request a demo today of GuardSquare at securityweekly.com/GuardSquare. As the world of software-driven everything becomes a reality and development cycles speed up, sales teams are taking a new approach to application security, one that enables security teams to scale by empowering developers to integrate security into their development workflows and toolsets, all while giving security teams the visibility and control they need. Snyk helps software-driven businesses develop fast and stay secure with a developer-first solution that seamlessly and proactively finds and fixes vulnerabilities in open-source libraries and containers. Learn more and see the solution for yourself at securityweekly.com/Snyk.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 99, recorded March 9th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hey, Matt.
Since it's episode 99, do we get a party like it's 99?
We should always be partying like it's 99. We've also got John Kinsella at the party here. So, hey, John, how's it going?
Woohoo! Hey, guys. I'm looking forward to episode 100.
Excellent. We'll hope you will all join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30 through April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2020. Click the register button to register with our discount code or the schedule button to sponsor a micro interview. Ocean and the Pell Center are partnering together to present Cybersecurity Exchange Day on Wednesday, March 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Salve Regina University in the beautiful Newport, Rhode Island. Visit securityweekly.com/Ocean2020 to register for free and come join in the fun. Guy Podjarny is Snyk's founder and president, focusing on using open source and staying secure. Guy was previously CTO at Akamai following their acquisition of his startup, Blaze.io, and worked on the first web app firewall and security code analyzer. Guy is a frequent conference speaker and the author of O'Reilly, Securing Open Source Libraries, Responsive and Fast, and High Performance Images. Hello, Guy, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, your bio already mentions using open source and staying secure, and that already sounds like a good way, I think, to describe Snyk. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and what brought you to creating Snyk.
Sure. So Snyk is, it's actually more than open source. It is mostly been created to be a developer tooling company that tackles security. And I guess, my background really kind of leads me into it. I've been in the AppSec space for about a decade, working on AppShield and AppScan, the first web app firewall, web app security scanner. Basically trying to educate the world, first of all, that, they even have a problem, that application security is a thing, SQL injections and the likes. And then subsequently trying to do, this kind of keyword that is not new anymore at all, which is shift left, trying to get developers to embrace security. And succeeding financially with the product, but not really succeeding in getting developers to embrace it. So I'll cut back to this. I left the world of security and I started a web performance startup called Blaze that made websites faster. And as you mentioned, we were acquired by Akamai, and I was CTO at Akamai for a few years and was very much a part of the kind of early rise of DevOps, with the Velocity conference and a variety, like the performance industry as a whole has really been the first one to embrace or be disrupted by DevOps. And so I learned there's a different way. There's a way that you can build tools that developers actually love, and that is kind of bottom up and practitioner oriented. And so with all of that journey, Snyk is really the culmination of those two journeys, is to basically take kind of that aspiration that we had before around getting developers to embrace security and apply some of the learnings that we have from DevOps to how to make that happen by actually sort of focusing on developers and building, a company, a product, everything around it really that orients at developers first and offers security capabilities.
So Guy, quick question, because you have an interesting background on the performance side, right? And did you learn specific techniques on the application performance management side that you're now applying into the application security side? Because I see a lot of correlation between some of the monitoring you do to make performance of an application better, to also make the application more secure. Did you learn some interesting things through that journey that you're now applying on the security side?
Absolutely, there's like a million of them, but I think a lot of it is not necessarily on one piece of tech or the other, but rather how APM vendors and performance and ops vendors at the likes have approached the problem, which is people first, or kind of user first. So when you think of the world of security, like the world of ops, it has a buyer, somebody who signs the checks. And before in ops, that was also the case. There were people dealing with performance or ops, and they would buy it, they would own the tool. But they kept trying to get the developers to use the solution and to actually work on it day to day. And they couldn't really until, and that's what happened in performance, they built developer-oriented tools. When you look at like New Relic is probably the prime example, they built a product that was designed for developers to use. They built a go-to-market that was designed for developers, right? Anywhere from the data nerd shirt to, a good free tier with a self-serve product to actually tackling problems and pain points that developers face day to day. And then they expanded from there to this sort of broader performance monitoring platform, right? And that platform is the one that eventually kind of took over the market, right? And AppDynamics and kind of the likes that followed. So I think a lot of what we've learned, or like the key learning I would point to in Snyk, is we understood that if we want to get developers to embrace security, if we want to shift, this type of activity, just like what happened in DevOps, we have to build a solution that first and foremost caters to the developers. So, that manifested in a variety of things. Some of them look like New Relic and some don't. Like, look like New Relic from, it's a builder, not a breaker. Like the website is designed for someone to come in and sort of be self-serve, start, sort of a good free tier that helps the product become viral. Very like does what it says on the tin, not a lot of sort of marketing fluff on there. But then it's not like New Relic in that when you talk about the sort of the broader comprehensive solution, it's more about security governance that has some analogies to resilience, not so much maybe sometimes to performance, sometimes not. And also in the, what it means to make a developer successful is a little bit different, right? In our case, it was things like, the Git connectivity and being able to plug into the code review process that happens in Git. Presenting results in an application context. Actually, that actually is a little bit like New Relic, which is, don't present some graphs and all that disconnected from my daily lives, but rather present the security problems or performance problems in the context of the app. So those very much manifested above and beyond any instrumentation based or sort of technical elements. I think those were the key learnings.
Yeah, I think it's a really important piece that you just hit on, right? Is that it has to be developer first. If we're going to embed security into this DevOps process, right, then the developers are the ones that have to decide to use it. Security can't necessarily force this down the developers' throats. And I think that is a very interesting dilemma that faces a lot of security companies right now, is how do they get adoption of their security products to an audience they don't understand or have never sold to in the past, which is the developer. So I think you've taken a very interesting approach, which is unique compared to a lot of people we see in the space.
Well, thanks. I mean, I think it definitely kind of worked out well for us, focusing indeed, and persevering. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the journey if we want, but, persevering with that sort of focus on the developer. And then of course we also kind of satisfied the need of that security person. And it's interesting how embracing that approach leads you to design a different product. Even if you started with the same problem statement of like, what's the problem you're tackling? If you focus on looking at it from the developer angle, it's entirely different. And like I'll be the first to sort of to admit that we haven't been doing it this way. I've built a product titled AppSec Developer Edition, and it was ran in Eclipse, right? And it dealt with source code, and it was called Developer. Clearly, it was a developer product, except it wasn't. It was an auditor product built into a development environment. And I think, at least for me, that realization didn't really hit until Snyk. That's what we did back then.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction between building a tool that's a developer tool versus an auditing tool. I think that's what you all were just starting off the discussion about, building tools for the developers to use. It also sounds like then this means the developers are taking on a lot more of the responsibility for security as well. And therefore they need good tools, giving them good signals, good feedback about security, the state of their applications. But talking about this journey that you've been going on into getting to this point where you're building a strong developer-oriented tool that's actually for developers and not just an audit tool in sheep's clothing, what has that been like? Or what have you seen, or how have you seen development teams react to taking on more of this responsibility? Or for that matter, security seeing more of the responsibility moving on to those development teams?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'll get back to that last point on security. Both parties need to adapt to the surrounding. But if I look a little bit at our journey, so we focus on the developer and we built a product oriented at it. So we started by thinking about how developers consume tools. And if you look at the solution, hopefully, even if you go to the Snyk website now, you'll see that Snyk looks a lot more like a New Relic or a Twilio or a Stripe than it does, necessarily a cyber company or even an AppSec one. And for instance, one of those is that there's this rich freemium tier. It is free for open source, and open source projects started using it publicly. So that creates a certain visibility amidst the developer community, and they started embracing it. They like it. There's really no friction, and they get going. They use the product. We also understood that from a developer's perspective, the goal isn't to find a problem; it's to fix a problem. Now, auditors should care about that as well. But arguably, the auditor's job ends with finding the problem and then handing it off. And a developer's job ends with fixing it. So we built a lot of core capabilities into the product around automated remediation. So we open automated fix pull requests that fix the vulnerabilities that we find in open source components and the likes. And that actually gave us a lot of good visibility within the open source community, right? Because we would protect some open source project that has 1,000 watchers in GitHub kind of monitoring that repository. And when we would fix a vulnerability for that project, that would inform all those 1,000 watchers that Snyk just did that, right? And it'll inform them about the fact that this is even a possibility. And we extended that free tier to also allow them to start protecting their own private code without needing to purchase or anything, right? Just get going, and built a very self-serve product. So with all of those sort of sequences with command line interface and GitHub integrations and all sorts of others, we got a lot of usage. And really for the first couple of years, we got thousands and then tens of thousands of users and really minimal revenue. And it was interesting. We basically learned that developers really, really care about their slice of the world. They want like this amazing security solution for their Node.js environment that is so easy that it's like there's how much you care about security and there's how hard is it. And we're going to inch up how much you care, but we really dropped the how hard it is or how easy it is, right? It made it so easy that they embraced it, they used it. Security people, to be able to justify a purchase of a solution, they need a certain amount of breadth. They need also some governance tools, but they need a certain amount of breadth. So if you just have a Node.js product, that's just not good enough. You need to cover some X% of my critical, my stack to be able to justify a purchase. So we ended up broadening the product, building a lot more security governance capabilities to augment it. But we now had that golden standard of what good looks like for developers. And so we kept expanding according to that bar, which led to a product that is loved by those developers. And And we did maybe the slightly more tried and true piece. Everything is hard in startup land, but the slightly more tried and true, which is to build something that is also good at governance. And really that's where the curve really kind of grew, and we've seen pretty explosive growth. We 4x revenue last year, we 7x revenue the year before that, we 9x the year before that. So everything has been growing very, very, very fast clip since then. Once we kind of hit that mark, powered by that sort of developer love, and I think what we're seeing now is there's almost things that we've done almost by mistake, to accommodate not just any security person, but security teams trying to change the way they work to be predicated on enabling developers to be successful. If you look at DevOps, an SRE, sort of a system reliability engineer, is still in charge of uptime, or service reliability engineer is still responsible for the uptime, for the resilience of their systems. But the way that they make their systems resilient is by helping developers build resilient systems. So security basically needs to embrace this approach, right? So we've naturally, just because of our Devfirst motion, ended up talking to these security people that were looking to change their approach and be security people that succeed by enabling developers to be building secure software.
Yeah,
In that approach, just quickly, right, is the benefit was it made the governance for the security guys that much easier, right? Since it was already embedded with the dev teams, the ability for you to show value to the security teams was actually probably pretty easy, because when you took all that data and just kind of handed the governance piece to the security team, it was like, whoop, there you go, right?
Yep.
Instant value.
Absolutely. It's hard. You'd be hard pressed to find a security person that, their development team comes to them and say, hey, want to purchase this security solution? And they'd say, no, I don't want that, right? Like, the biggest risk for the security person as well in buying any sort of application security solution is that developers don't pick it up, because then it'll just be shelfware and won't be properly used. So it definitely worked as a great path into it. And, I've got a lot of criticism about the whole notion of shift left, sort of like, while I agree with it conceptually, it's just a step. It's not the end of the world, not the end of the road. And so I think this sort of tapped into that. It's not just about shifting left. It's about more than that, right?
Yeah, shift left is the step you have to take to get it embedded into development and into the code, but you still have to go all the way through, including the right. Left is just a starting point. It's not the ending point, because I still have to deal with runtime and everything else to complete that whole closed loop from a security perspective. Left is just, I think, an initial step.
Yeah, for sure. I like to say that it's not about shift left, it's about top to bottom. Shift left is in part because developers have expanded to the right, as you said. Like a developer now also needs to worry about the application, like operating the application, kind of running it in production. But then also that the real change is one of ownership, right? So it's one of taking those security people that are used to kind of be controlling, or like maybe the way they did their job was to sort of see all these vulnerabilities and actually kind of make the decisions and drive them to, get a bunch of them fixed, versus, bottom up, which is empower these teams that are bottom up, we're asking them to be empowered, right? We're giving them not just decision power, but we have an expectation that they will make decisions around, the application, around network, around sort of, access, around indeed sort of patching operating systems and application dependencies and containers, and we're asking them to make those decisions, and we're asking them to run really, really fast, but we have to also equip them with making those decisions secure. Otherwise, we keep chasing them around, and we're not truly having empowered teams, or we're just shipping insecure software.
Yeah, what I also hear from that discussion too is that that idea of shifting left for security, meaning where we're trying to focus or address security, as much as shifting right into what developers are doing. And especially talking about a tool like Snyk, is also addressing the idea of scale. Because as we're dealing with larger systems or more complex systems, we can't just throw more people at the problem. And it's not like we're trying to say that in DevSec ops, the ratio there is one developer to one security person to one ops person. It's all of this is what the DevOps team is doing, and we're going to scale through some tooling. And I think what was interesting too is that you were describing how to expect that scaling to come from tooling that addresses both that developer and governance needs. That's one way of scaling up through tooling. Are there other ways that you see teams trying to scale up and grow, even if it does include people, adding more people, and that ratio of how many developers should there be for a security person? Or is that too simplistic type of math to think of?
No, I think it's a very good approach. At the end of the day, like I think people are at the core of everything we do, and so what I see is the importance of aligning the security resources to the development teams. The ratio would vary by application and by kind of the organization's capacity and sensitivity. But today, when you look at security organizations, many of them are still mostly aligned organizationally where they report to and such to IT. They're sort of more thinking about that sort of deep IT stack. But when you stop to think about it, in the world of cloud, a lot of the decisions that used to be made by central IT are now a part of the application. So again, whether it's network access or it's patching operating system, versus in containers versus VMs, or even just like the database and such, used to be some central IT database. Now you might be using some MongoDB container or maybe some DynamoDB. All these decisions are now a part of the scope of the app. And so securing those applications becomes kind of a part of the development team and almost like a part of the scope of what application security is. So what you want to take some of those cycles. What I see actually quite a few of our customers doing is, first of all, take some of maybe the budget and the sort of investment and move it from maybe more IT security minded to application security, but then align that team, that AppSec team, to the development team, whether it's literally partnering. Sort of this AppSec person has these 5, 6, 3 dev teams kind of in their purview, or at least maybe it's reporting into the engineering. Like in Snyk, AppSec is a part of the engineering organization, and so you have to think about what's the organizational structure that helps these teams best to be aligned and connected, just like you might do with an HR team, right, or sort of a people team. And then when you do that, you want the right kind of metrics and enablement and all that. That's when tools kick in. Tools kick in because developers are never going to be security experts, no more than they are ops experts, right? There's a lot of analogies that you can do from DevOps to security. So what you want to do is you want to equip them with the tools, so when they make these decisions that have security implications around config, around network, around containers, that they're able to make them make those decisions in a secure way, right? Or sort of make secure decisions in the process, and to allow that person partnered with them or people partnered with them to see what happened and to help continuously improve the quality of these decisions and identify when something bad happened and step in to correct it when those occur. And that's, I think, what really helped us at Snyk is like we started from what the developers need to make these secure decisions, and we brought that along, from the open source security roots to container security, where again we sort of said containers are more the evolution of the app than they are the evolution of the VM, right? It made us build a different product, more developer minded. And with those capabilities, then we said, okay, how do we engage security? Which was just different and leads to it being a different solution. But it all ends up circulating to how development and security collaborates together.
No, I like that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so where some of your thoughts there are going are sort of around me. You're leading into a question I was thinking about, which is, so you guys are really focused around AppSec, and we're AppSec Weekly. But how do you see where's the handoff between your tool and what those developers are doing, and then what happens in actual operations, maybe with a different team and another tool? Do you see, is there a level of complement going on there between you and someone else? Or, is it sort of, I know you're not going to say you're done, but sort of what do you think about that? How does that work in your mind or with the product?
Well, I think clearly there's a lot of problems, and we're not going to solve all of them. I think this this change, I'll go back to the analogy of maybe of DevOps or sort of operations. I think where we see Snyk's role is when you're building resilient, like secure systems, when you're a developer and you're making these decisions, whether it's in your sort of your code, your application dependencies, your containers, your configuration, all of those are really areas where Snyk lives, right? And we're trying to kind of help developers make more and more secure decisions across different types of threats. Where we don't really play and is this notion of detecting attacks, which maybe in the world of ops, you can sort of look at the monitoring companies, indeed the APM companies and such, that are looking at, mostly it's what's going on in my production. So for that purpose, we partner with companies, right? So we partnered with Rapid7 and with Trend Micro and other companies where we work with them, we collaborate with them to help secure things in runtime, secure these applications as they're deployed. And that world is also rocked by that same change in the scope of application. So I don't know if that's not AppSec. That's still probably AppSec, but there's a difference between the runtime aspect of AppSec and almost the sort of the build time. We can help you build resilient applications that to begin with would be properly permissioned and therefore would sort of thwart attacks without any effort. But not going to be the ones to sort of alert the SOC, and I guess these alerts to the SOC, in my opinion, are the last thing to sort of go to dev. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I didn't want to make it. It's it's in where we are in our industry. No one tool solves everything. So I don't not try to say that you guys aren't addressing ops, but I was just sort of curious what your thoughts were around that. So yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm curious too, and you started to touch on there too a little bit about application security, but also cloud security and kind of what that means, because a lot of this discussion has been talking about changing responsibilities or broadening them or shifting where developers or security for that matter has been focusing. How have you seen the security teams that you interact with? How have you seen them approaching application security versus cloud security, especially when we're building cloud native applications, what that means for their responsibilities?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and actually it's interesting to see kind of amidst our customers and in the industry as a whole, a variety of approaches. So I think like cloud security teams have a little bit of an identity crisis going, and it's they wouldn't call it that, and it's not, there's like a ton of great work for them to do, but different teams approach it differently. There are probably about 3 different paths that we see for cloud security. One is an evolution of IT security. So people that basically have gone from managing their sort of physical data centers to managing these things that are in the cloud. And so those organizations we see is probably their starting point is maybe a little bit more old school, and they still think about securing a lot of these systems in a very centralized, non-dev oriented fashion, right? It's a VM on the cloud, or if it's a VM in the data center, or if it's a container, they're still trying to control everything centrally. And those are gradually kind of falling apart because they're further away from developers and applications. So they don't tap into the speed of the cloud, and there's constant conflict. The one that is a little bit further along is teams that they move it into being aligned with DevOps. So when you think about ops or sort of IT ops versus DevOps, which again, these are all somewhat arbitrary lines, then IT ops was again a more central organization where a lot of their success was predicated on them doing the work, right? Provisioning some systems or modifying them. While DevOps is more, it's really teams that are more about empowering and developers to be able to do a lot of that work and then offering that responsibility. So you see cloud security teams changing to be more of that mind and putting guardrails in place and the likes, alongside, of course, both teams would handle the cloud as a whole, just the specific cloud-specific security concerns that happen. Now, that last team is really starting to be quite blurry between AppSec and CloudSec, right? Because, at that point, if you're collaborating with developers, like, isn't this AppSec anyway? So that comes back to my view on this sort of evolution of the app. I think in the world of cloud, the scope of the application includes a lot of the cloud components. So what I would what I would expect, and we're seeing in some places is that cloud security is still figuring out its own sort of identity and what stays there long term, but it has these 2 ties, one into DevOps teams and the other into AppSec teams, and helping them support those two sort of sides of the fence. And I think a lot of responsibility is increasingly going into AppSec. So, and again, containers, just to sort of repeat that example, the first crew would sort of think of containers as just an evolution of the VM, and would just try to sort of apply the same patching methodologies and golden images on VMs, and they would fail because containers, are defined in a repo and they're built in a build system, and they're very much developer domain, so they can't engage. That sort of last group is much more developer minded. They'd build these controls and they'd help developers flag vulnerable components as they build them, and that's kind of more the approach we took at Snyk as well.
And the analogy only gets worse, though, when we think about serverless and Lambda functions and in other types of extrapolations of how the code's going to run, right? Because if you take the VM model and try to apply it to containers, it'll fail, as you said. But
Yep.
if I also try to apply that to a Lambda function, it fails even harder, right? And so, what we see in this trend of moving to cloud in some of these new architectures is that we're abstracting away layers that we've been comfortable with for a long time in the security space. And so you have to think about it different. Even the definition of infrastructure is now code in the cloud. And again, back to probably the developer and or the DevOps team that's actually defining that code as infrastructure gets spun up. More reason to focus on those audiences versus your traditional old IT security staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as AppSec people here, we need to probably separate between like the previous version of AppSec and CloudNative AppSec. And they're different because their scope is different, right? And therefore the different types of decisions that you're expecting developers to make and who controls them are different. So we need to embrace the sort of separation, because otherwise when you're trying to make one statement that is a best practice for AppSec and you're trying to bundle in the sort of the older school applications where the scope of the app was the code and the libraries versus the cloud native applications where they include all of those kind of infrastructure type decisions, then you're just not going to be successful, right? So you have to think about this cloud native AppSec as a different sphere, right? A different way to sort of assess the solutions that you purchase and who should be involved in making those decisions and running them.
Yeah, as you're thinking about these, and is there something that we could be that you want to say we should be looking forward to from coming up from Snyk, or something else for us to keep an eye out for?
Just kind of world domination, as a whole. We remain very committed to this sort of developer first approach, right? So we are trying to think, the whole company is built with this sort of dev first ethos, and every time we think about a capability or something that we can build, then we think about what would be the dev first approach here. What would we do differently? From a dev first angle. So container was the last sort of big evolution that we've had, and more recently we launched. At this point, it's still sort of a private beta. It's going to be public beta in a bit around Kubernetes configuration, as we sort of explore that aspect of decision making that is again kind of rolled into the developers' hands, right? We're asking developers to make configuration kind of stack infrastructure configuration decisions, again network access and user permissions and the likes, and today we're not equipping them. We're only late in the process are we equipping them with being able to find out if a problem occurred, right? If they've made an insecure configuration. So we built what we think is a very dev oriented, a very powerful solution for being able to flag these types of configuration security mistakes early in the process in a dev-friendly fashion, which we're, I guess, kind of staying tuned a little bit. In about a month, they'll be public, and we're looking to sort of evolve in that space.
Matt, he's been listening to you talking about config management and config issues.
It's one of the biggest attack vectors right now, right? It's the one that nobody thinks is sexy, but it's the one that's creating a lot of havoc in the space. So kudos to you guys for actually starting to tackle the configuration problem, because I see that as the one big kind of blind spot that a lot of organizations have. It's hard to understand how to secure configurations when you're dealing with so many different services and components in these really complex applications now. It's hard. It's difficult.
Yep, exactly. And it's all about security hygiene at scale, right? Fundamentally, it's just about all these many decisions, and it's not some super sophisticated, advanced persistent threat. Most of the time, it's about a door left unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep,
well,
absolutely.
Yeah, I also too will be looking forward to any way to helping developers better understand the configurations and avoid making mistakes. And Guy, you've given us a great talk here about helping us better understand, and I think our listeners to better understand that developer-first oriented way of thinking about security, both from Snyk, but as well as just in general approach to working with teams. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, not at all. Thanks for having me on, and it was a great conversation.
Thanks again. And I also want to thank Matt and John, and I want to thank all of the listeners. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to return with news of the week.